Just it's live now. So Nihar, you can start.
Let's start.
Dr. Nihar, you can start right now.
Namaskar and good morning to all. I am Dr. Nihar Patra, University Librarian of Manipur University, a Central University Impal, and a life member of Odisha Library Academy, OLA. Let me welcome Dr. Banambar Sahoo, President of OLA, Librarian, Regional Medical Research Centers, our eminent speaker, Professor Naresh Agarwal, webinars team of OLA, and most importantly, our participants. Today, webinar topic is role of information providers in fighting fake news and disinformation. The title of webinar is very interesting. This topic is hot and so sorry for disturbance in between. So this today topic is hot and has relevance with the current scenario. The fake news can be categorized in two ways: news that is entirely false and news that are not completely accurate but are partially true. Fake news and remorse had been prevalent in the world always, but due to increasing accessibilities towards society via internet, television, WhatsApp, Facebooks, and any other media, it has taken greater from this day. So fake news could be created for the purpose of just a prank on someone or to ignite any social issue. It Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you, Dr. Patra.
Yeah. Fake news can have sometimes a very negative impact on the minds of society. So some group of people readily starts believing in any form of news piece without consulting any associate facts and continue to forward it to other. Whereas some groups of people even don't believe in true news, considering it to be a fake. I understand that the younger generations are an easy target for fake news creator as they are immature and inexperienced. Therefore, it is mandatory to investigate each news and make the readers aware of the fake and real news. The news channels and the newspaper are already doing that, but don't have any separate and dedicated team for it, and their coverage is also limited. So I felt that there is an immediate need to have an independent organization that should dedicatedly verify the news, whether it is fake or a true one. In my suggestions, an organization or association like the FN, like the fake news fighting network, should be designed at every state level to verify each viral news on PPP models. The team involved in these associations could not only be a library professionals, but could be anyone from any professionals background volunteering to eradicate the fake news from the nation. So some sorts of portals should be designed at a state level, so where bibliographical informations along with the web links of all fake news and disinformations can be stored. This could be developed with proper guidelines, policy, and procedures. So without wasting time, now I'd like to invite Dr. Sahoo, the president of OLA, to say a few words on OLA. Dr. Sahoo.
Thank you, Dr. Nihar. Very good morning and namaskar to everybody. Welcome to Odisha Library Academy webinar. Today we are conducting the second series webinar of this year. Previous year we have achieved a very good height of Odisha Library Academy webinars. We have conducted more than 12 continuous webinars. That is a very success story of the Odisha Library Academy. Since pandemic is going on, physical meeting and seminars is impossible for us because Odisha Library Academy is committed for the development of the Odisha librarian community and LIS profession. That's why we are just continuously conducting the webinars for the development of our young and professionals, for which they will achieve a certain height and take this our profession to a certain height of the state. Today we have with us very eminent Professor Naresh Agarwal. He is a very eminent library scientist. He is an information scientist. He is the professor of Simmons University, Boston, USA, and also he is the president-elect of ASIS&T, Association for Information Science and Technology, and he is very learned person. And today's topic also very interesting. That is fake news and that is misinformation. Because nowadays you see fake information is roaming in every social media, like WhatsApp and Twitter, like that. As you know, the fake information spreads 10 times more speeder than the authentic news, real news. That's why it spreads like fire. Especially fake news spreads in social media. The detailed discussion will given by our today's eminent speaker, and Dr. Nihar Patra is a very genius and talented LIS professional of our state, and he will coordinate this total program. And question answer session will be started just after the presentation of Dr. Naresh Agarwal, and after that, Dr. Nihar will coordinate all the things and the presentation will start. Before starting, I will give an announcement that Odisha Library Academy will observe its annual day celebration, that is on 12th August. That is the foundation day of Odisha Library Academy, National Librarians Day, and the birth anniversary of Professor Ranganathan, father of Indian librarianship. Now, I request Dr. Nihar Patra to give a introduction of Dr. today's guest. After that, presentation will start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saw, for your kind words. Now I'd like to introduce the most eminent speakers, Professor Naresh Agarwal. Presently, is working as a associate professor and director of information science and technology concentrations at the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons University, Boston, USA. Dr. Naresh research area is information behaviors and knowledge management. His first books exploring context in information behavior, seeker situations, surroundings, and shared identities was published by Morgans and Clayfalls in 2018. His second book, You Know the Glory, Not the Story, 25 Journey Towards Ikigai, is coming out in 2021. He had been a keynote invited speaker at workshops and conferences in different countries, including in the USA, Canada, Japan, France, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, South Africa. Dr. Naresh has held various leadership positions in Association of Information Science and Technology. He was a member of its boards of directors, co-chaired its annual meeting in 2017, initiated the South Asia chapter, and was awarded the Association for Information Science Technology James M. Christus Leadership Awards in 2012. He is currently the president-elect of ASIS&T. Prior to entering the doctoral program at National University of Singapore, Naresh worked for 6 years in technology roles in the BIOS hours IP, bioinformatics, and digital cinema industries. Among other things, Agarwal has been a debater, public speaker, likes to paint in watercolor and oil. In 2018, he started and initiated a project to gather human stories through interviews to inspire other humans' story. So these are the briefs about the Professor Naresh. Now I'd like to uh, invite Dr. Naresh to give his presentations, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nihar Patra. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Nihar Patra and Dr. Shahu and all the organizers in the Odisha Library Academy. And I'll just share my screen now. So you should be able to see my screen.
Yeah, now it is with you.
Okay, thank you. So the title of my talk is Role of Information Providers in Fighting Fake News and Disinformation. And that's my email address over here, agarwal@simmons.edu. And that's my website, web.simmons.edu/Agarwal. And if you're on Twitter, you can follow me at Naresh AG. And when we talk about disinformation and fake news, right, there was quite a bit of introduction which both Dr. Sahu and Dr. Nihar talked about, is that it is very prevalent. And I like to think of the example of a rainfall. Like right now, there's the monsoon season in India going on. So when we think of the rainfall, right, fake news and disinformation is really like rain, very heavy rain, and which is continuous rain. And then any attempt to fight fake news can be thought of as holding an umbrella or a raincoat. So when we think of the role of information providers, which is librarians and other information scientists, so we are really trying to train people with critical thinking and other kinds of skills and train them to hold the umbrella in a way, but we are really not trying to defeat false information in any way, because that's really like this huge the outpouring of downpouring of rain that's going on. So we can't really stop the phenomena, but we can train our people to identify and to fight it in various ways. So right now I'm in Boston, Massachusetts, which is to the northeast of the US, and many of you are in Bhubaneswar, which is to the eastern coast of India, and also connecting from other parts of India and the world. So that's the distance we have right now. But I'm born and brought up in Sikkim, which is to the northeast over here, and I spent a big chunk of time in Singapore, which was somewhere here right now. So this is the campus of Simmons University in Boston, and there's a new construction going on. There'll be a new tower coming up over here on the science building. My office is on the second floor of the Palace Road building over here, and this is the old main college building. The university was started around 1899, and you see that it's the same copper tower that you find on the Statue of Liberty as well, which turns green when oxidized. And this is in the fall, New England turns, like all the leaves turns green and yellow and red in the fall season. This is just outside my office in September sometime. And this is a little bit about Sikkim. I think many of you are familiar with it. I was born and brought up in Gangtok. And this is a lake in the northern part of Sikkim, Gorodongmar Lake in North Sikkim. And this was the school that I went to, Tashi Namgyal Academy in Gangtok. And then in 1995, I went to Singapore to study. So this is just a picture of Singapore. I did my computer engineering in Nanyang Technological University, and then worked for 6 years in the industry, mostly in Singapore, and then a few months in India and Hyderabad, and then a few months in the Silicon Valley in California as well. And then I went back to the university to the National University of Singapore. I did my PhD there in the School of Computing. So that was a little about my background, and coming more towards my research area. So the main area that I research in is information science or information science and technology. So here you can see this, it can be understood as a triangle with three sides. On the one side is the human or the person, and on the other side is information. So a lot of what we do, I think, in this space, which I'm sure a lot of you in the audience as well, is we look at the space in terms of the interaction between the person and information. And often this interaction is mediated by technology. So right now we are using a streaming service, a technology tool to interact with each other, like StreamYard.com. And sometimes people use Zoom or GoToMeeting or other kinds of software. And then, so technology forms a very important mediator in a way for people's interaction with technology right now. And now with most of us having smartphones and being connected with the phones a majority of the times, this interaction is very largely mediated by technology. And that became much more pronounced during this COVID-19 pandemic as well. So at the heart of my research is the actor or the user. You can think of this person who can be a conference attendee or a person who is attending a webinar right now at the morning time in India and maybe like past midnight here in Boston in the US. It could be a working person, a student, a child, or any other person as well. So there's a researcher, a retired professor from Ohio State University, Brenda Derwin. So she came up with a sense-making methodology. So she describes this person as a body, mind, heart, and spirit moving through time and space with a past history, a present reality, and future dreams or ambitions. And this person could have a need for information. So this need could be finding out about fake news, for instance, or how can we really fight disinformation and fake news. So as that need comes about, you start looking for information, and it could be from one or more sources, from friends or colleagues at a workplace, or people in the library, or you can get books and manuals. And a lot of the times we find information through computer-based sources, through tablets, smartphones, and desktops and laptops. And sometimes we find information serendipitously, like by chance or accident, when we're not really looking for it, and we have this big aha moment. So as this information comes about, we try to make sense of this information, and then as we try to make sense, some of our questions get answered, but some don't. And as new questions arise, we follow this cycle of searching. At some point, we give up, not because we have all our questions answered, but we think that what we know until this point is kind of enough for now. And along with this, we also avoid information at times. Like for instance, when there's information on the COVID-19 pandemic, after a while I stopped looking at the figures over there. And for the last few years, I've been doing research on the non-response behavior. How do people feel when their phone calls and messages are not responded to, the messages and calls that you make using your smartphones and tablets? So that avoidance behavior is also like a key part of information behavior overall. So this large phenomenon can be seen of as human information behavior. And I also do research on context, which is like what series of circumstances and other things which affect this process of need and seeking and searching that the actor or the user engages in. And related areas, knowledge management, where you're looking at the same phenomena, not from an individual's point of view, but from an organization's point of view. So this is a book on exploring context and information behavior that I wrote, and I painted the cover for it. And this is a new book that should be coming out later this year in August or September. And the Indian version of the book will be called Engineering to Ikigai, 25 Stories Towards Purpose. So in India and the rest of South Asia, it will be published with this title with a different publisher. So coming back to the phenomena of our main topic for the webinar today, which is on fake news and disinformation. Now, what is it really? We hear various terms such as propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. So all of these terms are sort of thrown about to us. Sometimes we hear things like hoax and so on. And so during the COVID-19 pandemic, like since last year, we started hearing news like you can use garlic to treat coronavirus, and then misinformation, fake news spark India coronavirus fears. So again, there was a lot of false information going on that was spread, and this site had a lot of links about all kinds of various kinds of treatments which were false, linked to sources which were spread around in social media and WhatsApp and so on. So again, in times of crisis, misinformation abounds. COVID-19 can be cured by ingesting fish tank cleaning products, and was developed in Chinese or American or French labs. And again, Ronaldo and other people tested positive. So all of this was false information that was spread early last year when the pandemic started. So then what I did was that At that point in time, I recorded a video last year in March sometime, and this was a video which was in Hindi. So the purpose of this was I was trying to sensitize people. Let me see if it opens.
नमस्कार, मेरा नाम नरेश अग्रवाल है। मैं बॉस्टन अमेरिका में चाइना से शुरू हुई थी, उसके बाद में बीमारी थी जैसे डायबिटीज़ हुआ या फिर को बचा सकते हैं। और जब तक आप बाहर हैं, जब तक आपको पता नहीं है कि आप जिन लोगों से मिल रहे हैं कि वो हरे भरे हैं, स्वस्थ हैं या फिर उनको बीमारी है, तब तक आपको ये मान के चलना चाहिए कि हाँ इसको बीमारी है और इससे मैं दूरी बना के रखूं।
So this was in the early stages of the pandemic. Now, of course, we all know about what are the things to follow, but at that point in time, there's a lot of false information spreading. So coming back to our model here you have information behavior knowledge management. Now, as this information comes about now, we cannot really be sure as this information that we're getting is really information or is it false information or disinformation. And so that is one of the key problems that we face now. So we don't really know how to make sense of the information that we are encountering. So looking at these terms, right, information, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, if information is false, then it can be characterized as misinformation. But if it is intentionally false, that means somebody is purposely making it false, then that is linked called as disinformation. And when it is applied to the context of news, then this term fake news is often used, and this became largely prevalent through 2016 onwards in the context of the US elections at that point in time. So disinformation is the one that we're most concerned about. Misinformation is one way. It is like information is wrong, but it is not purposely so. And a lot of the times misinformation is corrected, but disinformation is, there is a purpose behind. And one of the things which Dr. Nihar was mentioning earlier was saying that at the state level to have various bodies to fight disinformation. Again, those are useful and perhaps will work if the bodies are autonomous. But sometimes if there's an intention behind spreading false news, then that becomes difficult, because then a lot of the times when we say media has a role in fighting false information and in vetting news sources. But if media itself is involved in spreading false information because of a certain bias that it might have, then again it becomes difficult to fight it. So this intention is a big problem to identify when we talk about false information. So who are the people who generate this false information? It could be someone wanting to make money. It could be people who are writing satire, or it could be untrained journalists, or it could be people who are partisans who are trying to influence people. So there is this social identity theory, and this is an infographic from my book on context. So we as human beings, right, we can think of ourselves as individuals. But then oftentimes we look at people as belonging to a certain part of a group. We sort of stereotype people based on the race that they have, or the certain ethnicity, which part of India they come from, or what skin color do we have, or let's say what's the age of the person, what's the gender or a sexual preference or a disability or religion or profession, and so on. So a lot of the times we don't see people as people, but we see people as groups that we think that people belong to. And often we only take one part of this person's identity, and we sort of see people as part of that groups. And this line was written by Rabindranath Tagore, where he said that we are in a haste to seek for general types and to overlook individuals. So the basic reason is that a lot of the times when we see false information happening, right, we find the stereotyping that is going on. And people, if that false information is spread about people from a different political ideology, or different people from that we do not really, or from people from different religion and so on, that we do not really understand very well. So there is a lot of this in-group, out-group differentiation that's going on as well behind this the spreading of false news. So a lot of the times there's this reality versus competing narratives. So we might have a certain point of view, and then that same narrative is there, which is different people spread that narrative in different ways. So, for instance, if you look at the Tibet issue, right, the people in mainland China, they have a different narrative about it, and when we look at it from the Indian context, or coming from Tibet, so from Tibetans, there's a different narrative to it. And similarly, in the Kashmir issue, there are different narratives whether it's looking from a Kashmiri point of view or Indian point of view or a Pakistani point of view and so on. So a lot of the times you find that there are these different narratives. Again, in the political systems and liberal versus conservative or right versus left, there are these various narratives. So a lot of the times false information is spread when you're trying to change the narrative in a certain way or to influence the people in a certain narrative. So reality is often very different than the narratives that are spread about. Reality is kind of often a mix of different narratives and not really one particular narrative. So these are some very simple examples of narratives, things like ethnocultural nationalism is more important, or civic nationalism is more important, or society is more important than individual, or individual is more important than society, or science is more important than religion, or religion is more important than science, and so on. So these are just very simple examples that I gave, but there are more complex examples in real life. So there is a bending of news and social media towards particular narratives. There's the left versus right, liberal versus conservative. In India, there's BJP versus Congress and so on. So there are, and again, in different states, we have various political parties and so on. So there are various narratives there as well. So what are the implications of all this? The implications is that people actually end up believing disinformation as truth. And that is the sad part, because just because something is there, people are not able to distinguish between like whether something is fact or something is what they believe in. And this was reported in 1992, but you see that this problem has been there for a very long time. Even before that, it has actually been there across centuries. But this is a phenomena which has become much more acute now because of the spread of social media and easy availability of smartphones that people have now. So especially when there is enough repetition, then people believe the false news. So if you keep telling a lie 100 times, then people will tend to believe that just because they see it so often in media that they follow. So these are the top messaging apps by various countries. Like in WhatsApp is used in the Indian subcontinent and some other places. And then you have Facebook Messenger in North America and so on. And YouTube is the most used social media platform. And then you have Facebook and Facebook Messenger and so on. So this is an infographic of this year in 2021 as to what happens in 1 internet minute. So in 1 minute, there are 21.1 million texts are sent, or there are like 695,000 stories shared on Instagram, and then here you have 500 hours of content uploaded on YouTube and so on. Okay, so here you have all of these various kinds amount of interaction that's happening just within 1 minute. So what we don't know is how much of this is true information and how much of this is disinformation. Of the 3.4 million snaps that are created and 69 million messages sent and so on, and Facebook 1.4 million scrolling, and then 21.1 million texts sent. So there's this huge amount of content just being generated in 1 minute, just in 60 seconds. So how do we know that how much of this is true and how much of this is false? So it's really like this big downpour of rain that I earlier talked about. And as information providers, we can only hope to train people to be wary of what they consume in this huge barrage of information that is being generated every minute. So there is the spread of disinformation because of the ease of copying, pasting, sharing, and information is seeded on sites to entice people into sharing. There's a role of bots, and so there is social media is playing a huge important role, not just in giving us access to information, which is what information professionals try to. That is one of our major endeavors in terms of getting people easy access to information and knowledge. And libraries have existed for that very purpose in the beginning. But now the same tools are being used to spread false information as well. So why do we believe in false information? We believe in false information because of a certain biases that we have in our minds. We have a certain prejudice as people. We have a certain cognitive bias. If we notice in our interactions, right, we tend to like those people who agree with us, and people who disagree with us, we tend to not like them as much. And they might be speaking the truth, but we often want to believe those things that agree with the point of view and reject those things that do not agree with the point of view. And this is a major issue why people end up believing false information as true, because of this ingrained cognitive bias. So one type of cognitive bias is a confirmation bias. So when you have objective facts, and then you have facts that conform with the beliefs. So what we see is only those facts which conform with our beliefs, and not necessarily all those objective facts which are outside of our belief system. And that's a huge issue. So what we have right now, in the scenario that we have is, we have a social media and contacts which are feeding us images, text, videos that conform with our biases. And we have our own ingrained cognitive biases over here, confirmation biases. And we have the news from media that fit in with the biases. So when all of these come together, the social media giving us constant information within a minute, and our own biases, and all this news that fit with the biases, that creates a perfect echo chamber where we only tend to consume that kind of information which tells us that you are right, which agrees with the point of view. So if you think of this story, right, there is a story of, in Hindi you call it like Kuein ka Mendak. So where you have a person a frog who lives in a well and meets the frog who lives in the ocean or the sea, right? And asks like, how big is the ocean? And then the frog in the well says that, the frog in the ocean says, oh, it's like very, very big. And then frog in the well will say like, is it as big as my well? So it's kind of like that. So the frog in the well is not able to imagine how large the ocean really is. And right now, the unfortunate part is that even though we are so connected to each other through social media and through all kinds of technology tools, but we actually like the frog in the well, because a lot of the friends we have, the people we interact with, the news media that we follow, the TV channels we have, and all of those often tend to be the people and the sources of information that agree with the value system, that agree with the points of view, and feed onto our ingrained biases. And because of that, we end up becoming like that frog in the well, and not necessarily seeing things from different points of view, or seeing things from a critical lens and trying to question our own biases. So here then we have a targeted ads and we have a personal data. So this creates a filter bubble where we are exposed to people and ideas and sources with the same beliefs, same ideas, same information. So what can we do now, looking at this problem, which is so big now? So what are the current efforts out there, and what can information professionals do to help towards these efforts? So libraries already have information literacy programs that have been traditionally done, but these need to be invigorated and made more current, especially in terms of looking at various examples of videos and with false information, and the patterns in which the false information is spread. So I think if you show people example of various patterns in which the false information gets spread, right, then you can kind of see that how this information is spreading. So there are various libguides which libraries have. Now, social media, the giants like Facebook and Twitter and Google and so on, so they have been doing various things to fight false information. Like, for instance, they're doing things like hiring fact-checking teams and disrupting financial incentives for creating false information. And Google has done things like ranking improvements and easy reporting of fake news, and come up with some new tools. And Twitter has been removing a huge number of troll and fake accounts. And sometimes governments are involved as well. So for instance, the European Union had an agreement with Facebook, Google, and Twitter, where they came up with a code of practice on disinformation in 2018. But again, some people say that maybe the government should keep out of this, because in some cases, the governments themselves are responsible for spreading false information. So then it is, again, debatable as to what role should government have in this, or what role should independent bodies have in this. So that the who participates also is one of the big questions in this, in fighting this incentives. But definitely information professionals and librarians and all the people who are in the information field have a very important role to play in this. So this was a video of one of the interviews that I did with my former dean, Eileen Abels, where I talked about how can information professionals help people develop critical thinking. So let's look at a snippet of this. News, right? And you mentioned critical thinking, and I've seen that increasingly more and more people actually believe fake news as true. Yeah. And I think there's a great need to educate people on critical thinking. And how do you think information science professionals can come in trying to bring about this change?
I think that has to happen early in life. So by the time students get to college, I think it's late, okay, to unlearn. I think it has to start late elementary school, middle school, because I think that students, and that also has to do with careers. For example, we're trying to recruit more women into STEM, the science, technology, engineering, math. And that's difficult because by the time, even in high school, they get to high school, they've already made up their minds.
So this is one of the key points in the sense that the training has to start early, because by the time people are grown up, right, the confirmation biases and cognitive biases are very deeply entrenched. So a lot of this critical thinking training has to happen in the school level, and we have to teach our children in order to distinguish between false and true information. So that's one thing. Of course, it can carry on later as well, but that time it is much more difficult by the time people are adults. So this is a famous infographic by IFLA that has been translated into multiple languages in terms of how to spot fake news. So consider the source, like click away from the story to investigate the site, its mission, and its contact info, and read beyond. Like, so headlines can be outrageous in an effort to get clicks. So check the author, look for supporting sources, check the date. Sometimes old stories are reposted as current events, and look at it, something as whether it's a joke or not. And check our own biases that we have, our own cognitive and confirmation biases, and see if they can affect a judgment. And then ask a librarian, consult a fact-checking site, or ask experts. So a very simple thing that we can do, of course, is that a lot of the times if something seems too good to be true, just get a few keywords from that information, from that news item, and put the word fact check or hoax next to it, and do a search on Google, and often we'll find if it is a hoax or not, we'll find certain sites giving us information on that. So there is a list of fact-checking websites. So here, there are these sites, fact-checking sites listed by various countries, and there is a fact-checking sites by the US here, and when we come to India, so again, there's a list of fact-checking sites. So these are great sites to consult every time we want to verify certain news. Okay? But we also need to be careful about certain sites which are like fraudulent fact-checking websites, which are sites which are like fact-checked Armenia, fact-checking Turkey, and so here they have they've listed these as sites which are not really to be believed as fact-checking sites. Okay, and again, you can there is this website called mediabiasfactcheck.com where you can check for the biases of certain media, and so this is a great site to consult as well. So we looked at these fact-checking sites in the US. These are ones in India, and these are some of my papers related to disinformation and fake news and ways to fight it. And in 2019, I had a paper with Sandra Ardeles and Isa Yanke, and this was on serendipity and critical thinking, like fighting disinformation in a socio-technical society. So where we proposed serendipity, test, and critical thinking as two ways to fight false information. And in 2020, with Faraj Al-Saidi, who was a PhD student in my university, we had a paper on understanding and fighting disinformation and fake news, where we came up with a model and a framework, and this was accepted as a poster in ASIS annual meeting. And we recently had it accepted in the ASLIP journal as a full paper, where we have this model expanded much more. So this is looking at our model here. So we have a certain context which gives rise to this false information. So here what we have is there is the spread of fake news over time. So that's the diffusion of false information that is taking place. And on the one hand, you have the user's intention or confirmation bias. So as we consume information, right, there is a certain bias that we have, and we must be mindful of our own biases most of the time. And on the other hand, you have the intentions of the people who are creating false information and spreading false information. So what are their intentions? And often when they create this false information, they make use of algorithms and bots and social media tools to deceive people. So their intentions affect the use of these tools in certain ways. And as a user, right, we judge the reliability and credibility of the information sources that we find. So if we find that something is false, we can either choose to ignore it, And depending on our own biases, we can decide to use the information, whether it's false or true. And sometimes, even if we know that it is false, and if it conforms with the biases, we can choose to spread it or to forward it. And that can be a way in which we misinform or disinform people. So a lot of the times when I would, there were certain WhatsApp groups where I saw people spreading false information. So I would do a fact check and look at fact checking websites or do a search on Google and tell people that, okay, what you're spreading is, what you're is forwarding is false. Then that person would simply say that forwarded as received. So one of the things to realize is that forwarded as received is not an excuse. It is our responsibility to vet the information, to judge the information for credibility before we forward it, because we might have the false information, but as we spread it further, then we become party to it. So every time we send a simple message further, we have to make sure that whether it is true or not. And studies have found that the simple attempt at just telling people that what you're telling is false, that actually has a powerful impact. Even if you don't cite sources to say why it is false, just calling people out of the bluff is actually an important thing to do. So of course it's very tricky because sometimes you have to navigate relationships. The person spreading false information might be your uncle or your aunt or a close friend and so on. So sometimes we have to think of whether to keep that relationship or to argue with the person over a certain fact of some piece of information that they're spreading. So it is a very tricky navigation in terms of what to call out and to when. And that we can learn through trial and error and through trying things out with people as to what works and what doesn't. So here we have again a user's filter bubble and an echo chamber. So that really affects this entire phenomenon, this filter bubble, as well as own confirmation bias, which is kind of the big context shaping this whole phenomena of the diffusion of false information. And depending on our own perception of information as true or false, we can look at that information as either information or misinformation or disinformation. If we think it's true, then we will think of it as information. If we think that it is partly true, like it is some part or fully false or something, then we will look at it as misinformation or disinformation. So what are the ways in which we can fight this phenomena? So the way to fight it is by puncturing the user's filter bubble. So filter bubble is this echo chamber where the person is sitting in the same ideas, same belief systems. And we need to puncture that with other alternatives, with facts that we have to bring out. So the way we can do that is to teach people to be critical thinkers, where we just don't take anything that we believe as anything more than a belief. So a belief is a simple hypothesis to begin with, and then we need to gather data to see whether a belief actually holds or not, and what are the exceptions to a belief. So we can think of it as a Socratic way of thinking, and or a scientific temperament or a scientific way of thinking as well. But critical thinking and critical action is one of the key ways to teach people to fight false information. And libraries, again, and information professions can play a very important role in that. And we also need to be advocates in every forum. Like right now, what you're doing is organizing this webinar to spread awareness about fighting false information. So that kind of advocacy is important. We also need to train our students to do this. And serendipity tests. So earlier, like I mentioned in my model, saying that sometimes we find information serendipitously or by chance when we're not really looking for it. So by doing a serendipity test, we can see that, and this paper of ours talks more about the serendipity test over here. But what we can do is that we can actually test whether this information that we are thinking that we found by chance is actually that we found by chance, or is somebody planting that information for us. And we are thinking that we found that information by chance, but actually somebody is actually making us instruments in spreading false information by placing that information in front of us. So that kind of test and being aware of true versus false serendipity can also be an important way to identify false information. And of course, information literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, all of these are very important ways in which we can fight false information. And there are lots of organizations that are trying to train people into digital literacy and media literacy. So those, again, are very, very important right now, especially to train our children and our school-going children, and also people in universities, so that we can help fight this false information effectively. So this was something to do with COVID. So again, right now what's happening is that a lot of false information is spreading to do with COVID. So earlier, something to do with, let's say, the COVID protocols. This is an important website called covidprotocols.org. Now in India, you have these medicine like ivermectin, which a lot of people, doctors prescribe. And then if you look at the COVID protocol, that this is a US protocol. And when they say, right, and what they have found for ivermectin is that it is not recommended. So I think if you go down over here, recommendation, we do not recommend ivermectin use for treatment of COVID-19 at this time. Okay, so this is a good site, covidprotocols.org, where you can see that a lot of this false information, even about what to use for COVID, that is spread falsely. There's this other important site, which is about tips for managing COVID-19 at home. So this is again a good site, indiacovidsos.org. So what I've done is I've taken some infographics. So this is about, this was updated in April. So this is about what to do when to fight COVID. So if you have COVID symptoms, and so initially, right, all those things, the kind of medicines which they have, like ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, and vitamin C and D and zinc, and all those things which are prescribed, which they say as treatment is not routinely advised. So doxycycline is an antibiotic, and that is prescribed for the treatment of COVID, which is caused by a virus. So a lot of people take these medicine in the initial stages of COVID, and which is actually not required at all. And this is by a stream of doctors who have come together to create these infographics. So here again, usually just staying hydrated and simple paracetamol is all that is required at this stage. And if oxygen level is 92% or more, so there again, you have lying on the stomach, staying hydrated, and an inhaler, a steroid is again recommended over here. But then only when your oxygen level starts dropping, that is when steroids, that too for a very low dosage, is recommended. And this has to be very carefully administered, because you can have people's blood sugar might really rise when these steroids are administered. So, and the alternatives for those are also given. So this is for home care, and this is for under medical guidance, and this is for home care, that these people have come up with the infographics, a team of doctors. And this is in various languages. I pulled the one in Oriya over here. So this is a very important site where you can see the correct way to again fight COVID. So this is the indiacovidsos.org, and this was the home care site where there was like tips for managing COVID at home, and tips for rational use of steroids, and so on. So there are lots of infographics here in various languages that you can download and use and give to people that are in your close ones. So one of the big problems that's happening is people refusing to get vaccinated. So what I saw recently now, so there was this news is from today, actually, July 16th, and this is in the US in Atlantic. And this is in the state of Missouri in the US, and it says that the Delta variant is driving a wedge through Missouri. For America as a whole, the pandemic might be fading, and so people in the US might be fighting, might be getting a control of the pandemic because a lot of people are vaccinated. But for some communities, this year will be worse than last. So this article was talking about how in Missouri, certain hospitals are actually facing a worse pandemic because a lot of people there have refused to get vaccinated, and because of that, they're getting infected now. And this other article, this was an essay by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, which was 2 days ago, and where he's written about the importance of being vaccinated. So here again, one of the important things that we get from this article is that earlier there were supposed to be two kinds of people, the vaccinated people and the unvaccinated people. And now it seems that is no longer the case, that it is going to be two kinds of people, the vaccinated and the infected. So the basic truth is that either COVID will get to us or the vaccine will get to us. So we have to decide where do we get to first, like whether we choose the vaccine or whether we choose the virus. So it is very, very concerning even at this stage that a lot of false information is being spread about various vaccines, and a lot of people are not getting there is one question of availability, vaccines not being available. But then there's the other question of vaccines being available and people not taking it. And that's the part where we need to fight. So at least as soon as we get the vaccine, people should take the vaccine, because that's the only way by which we can beat this pandemic. And this is a very important concern, because that is a practical way in which this false information is affecting all of us at this point in time. So how to convince people to get vaccinated against COVID-19? So some people will say that we do not know the long-term side effects of the vaccine. So one question to ask them is that, do you know the long-term side effect of the virus? And then another question to ask them is that, do you think the virus is actually going to go away? Because it's here to stay. So the only way we can beat it is by developing, by having vaccines and making our bodies stronger to be able to fight these. So antibodies have to be developed within us. So that can only happen when we all get vaccinated, or sometimes that happens when we get infected. But that is not a good way to go about it. So some people will say things like, that God will look after me. And then again, one of the arguments which I use when I'm talking to my family members about things like that is that, how do you know that God has not sent you the vaccine? And now what will God do more than that? God has sent you the vaccine, and now you're saying that I will not take the vaccine. So there are various ways in which you can convince people, but convincing people to get vaccinated is very, very important right now, so that we can all win this fight. Because there's a huge amount of false information spread, like saying that vaccines cause infertility, or vaccines people are dying when they're taking the vaccine, and so on. Or there was a news item I read in which it said that all the people who take the vaccine will die within 3 years. So all of this are the kind of false information that are spread against various vaccines. So of course you have to look at the efficacy of vaccines, but once there's scientific data available, then people need to get vaccinated so that we are able to fight this phenomenon that's happening right now. So there is this protruthpledge.org, which is a great website, and you can take a pledge over here in terms of taking a pledge to verify, fact check information to confirm it is true before accepting it and before sharing it. So that is a pledge that we can all take. Balance, so see the whole truth even if some aspects do not support my opinion. Cite my sources so that others can verify my information, and distinguish between what is my opinion and what are the facts. And honor the truth and encourage truth. So that's a pledge that we can take, and this site is a good site where thousands of people have taken this pledge by giving the name and email. But this is a good pledge to encourage people to take and also to keep in mind. So going back to my initial model that I showed here. So now as we get disinformation, and sometimes as we find information serendipitously, we need to make sense of this information, whether it is genuine serendipity or not, whether this is false information or true information. And critical thought and action plays a very important role over here. And we also need to be able to evaluate the reliability of the sources that we are consulting. So those are the various ways in which we can fight false information. And as I mentioned earlier, there's this analogy of rain happening, and the ways to fight false information is really like holding an umbrella. So thank you, Odisha Library Academy, and all the organizers. And that's my contact information and Twitter, and those are my websites here. So thank you. I'm ready to take questions now, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh. We have few questions.
Okay.
One question from Avinash Das, I think. So what are the international jurisdictions and judicial angle to fight against case related to this issue, if not related to particular boundary of a nation?
What are the international jurisdictions and judicial angle?
Yeah.
So I do not know about this. I do not know what are the international ways in which you can fight this, but I'm sure there is the International Court of Justice where this could be taken. But if you look at any court cases, right, court cases traditionally have a lot of lies involved in it. You have two sides, lawyers from the two sides who are trying to put in their points of view. And it is more about which side is able to gather more evidence. And then whichever side is able to gather more evidence, that side is able to win. So it would be a court case. I think the International Court of Justice, you also have other organizations like the IMF and other UN associated bodies. I think they could play a role. But typically, I think this is more still in a country-wise issue, because even when you fight a case, a lot of the times you're fighting your opinion versus their opinion. And then we need to gather evidence to say that our opinion is correct as compared to the other opinion which is out there.
Another question is from the Sumantha Nair. What is the difference between the misinformation and disinformation?
Yes, so this one I showed in my slide earlier. So misinformation is basically a bigger category of false information. So any information which is false is misinformation, but disinformation is intentionally false. Once we know that this information is false, but we like in Hindi would call it जानबूझ के गलत information देना. When there's जानबूझ के part, that part is disinformation. Without the जानबूझ के is misinformation.
Another question from Dr. Ashok Sahu from RBI Librarians. Do you have any checklist to identify and differentiate the fake and real information?
Yes, so I think the major checklist again is the IFLA infographic that I showed earlier. When we say that what are the IFLA had a checklist in terms of identify the sources, look for the date of when something is happening, and then check our own biases as well. So those are the IFLA infographic is an important checklist. But for particular piece of information, you can always do like a Google search for the keyword and look for the word hoax, and also look at the fact-checking websites. So India has a lot of like Alt News, for example, and then other kinds of fact-check websites. So those are the good websites to go to for verifying any information which is out there.
Dr. Satyaranjan Sahu is asking, so do you think that government around the world are right in taking strict action on social media platform for their partitions actions handling misinformation and disinformation?
I think, especially when we look at information professionals, right? The information governments, the internet came about outside. Like when we look at the whole internet phenomena, even when blogs came about, websites came about, that was a way in which it was a democratization of information. So like individual people could create their blogs. We can have citizens and journalists right now. And Facebook and Twitter and all are various ways in which we as people are empowered. So when the government is taking action, right, we do not know whether the governments have a bias or not. So I think as individuals, we should be fighting to keep governments out of this actually. So that independent bodies could be responsible for this rather than governments, because governments again might have their own agenda because they are elected for a few years, and governments often try to propagate a certain point of view which they have.
Shigi George, a school librarian, wants to know what can be the best way to educate students about fake news and disinformation.
So I think the best way to educate is to show students lots of examples of fake information. So show them like example of a very common, widely spread viral video, for example, and then show them that how that viral video is false. Like sometimes what people do is that they'll take a speech given by a political leader or something, take a particular part of the speech, and then mix it with something else and put it out there, and then people will then start believing in that. And then once you show them the entire speech and say how that speech was taken as a particular part from a larger speech, then you know that information is actually false. So once students are shown, let's say 100 examples to identify, they will get used to the patterns, and then they'll be able to identify what they see is true or false.
Many questions. Thank you. Any questions left?
Yeah, I have one question to Professor Agarwal. I know as a part of technology, is there any new technology or application of AI or machine learning happening in US where it can, identify the fake news or misinformations?
I think yes. Technically, a lot of work is happening in this area. Especially, people are trying to make use of big data to see if there are certain patterns to it. What are the sources that are coming out? And that's where Twitter and all are playing a very active role. And even Google has these ways to report false news. So there's a lot of work happening in AI in this area. But I think it is like a whole concerted effort. So individual people, as well as technology companies, all need to come together. Because in some cases, they are the culprits as well, because the same social media algorithms are also being manipulated, but sometimes by political masters to, again, spread false information. So there again, we have to look at the various tools, but also see the intent behind it. So as people, we must be vigilant. I think that's the most important thing.
Right, you are absolutely.
One question from Ibrahim Malik. What is the role of librarian to help students to fight against fake news? the same questions, type of questions from the Basant Das also, how librarians will evaluate fact or not?
So I think first and foremost, librarians must be trained. So one of the first things we can do is to look at a lot of fact-checking websites, I think. I gave a list of the fact-checking websites. Once we start visiting the fact-checking websites, maybe every librarian should visit the fact-checking website every day. Once you start visiting fact-checking websites, right, then you know what is true, what is false. So when people come to us, once we are trained, we can train other people. I think that's the main thing. So to get people to verify for information, yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Naresh, for presenting extremely relevant topic of the webinars and beautifully explained. Really, I'm deeply influenced by the way you have presented this topic and answered to questions. As an information professionals, and we have to present and spread the information in a right way. So hopefully this will positively impact to our library professions, academicians, and all professionals and general public too. Now I'd like to request Vijay Katan Panda to give a vote of thanks. Pandaji.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nihar, for giving me this opportunity. This is actually thanks to all this Odisha Library Academy to giving me this opportunity to present the vote of thanks to our esteemed presenter and speaker, Professor Naresh Agarwal. His topic is actually very appealing to this, very burning for this entire age of internet, because where we are living in a civil society and where we have the, information is power, and we are spreading the information in a right or wrong direction, and whether we are getting the right information, it is for the information professionals or library professionals, it's most important for us to learn how the skill how to find the fake information. And you have been instrumental on it, and your presentation is very well appealing, and also it's resonates with this present scenario. And thank you so much for your valuable time and effort, and agreed for this Odisha Library Academy to give your valuable thoughts on that. Thank you once again. Thanks to Dr. Nihar Patra for your valuable effort in this, and you played a major role for Odisha Library Academy for bringing this such webinar. So we're happy to see this kind of contributions for Odisha Library Academy in and the near future also. Thanks to Dr. Banambar Sahoo for presiding this entire Odisha Library Academy sessions for and give his valuable thoughts on this topic. And thanks to our Odisha Library Academy executives for their continuous support in this pandemic, for this bringing this such kind of webinars for our information professionals. Thanks to our web admin Niranjan Mahapatra and other technical support team for this entire coordination of this webinar. And thanks to media team also, those who have are actively put on the media for our Odisha Library Academy brand and all. And thanks to all the viewers, those who have participated in this webinar, and we have enriched by their knowledge, and they have also asked the pertinent questions for to our speaker to get motivated, and for their encouragements also. Thank you so much for the entire Odisha Library Academy, and we are happy to conduct such more sessions in near future, so that everybody will be benefited out of it. Over to you, Dr. Banambar Sahoo, for his concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, the viewers. Special thanks to our today's speaker, Professor Naresh Agarwal. Very nice presentation. More better presentation in the discussion portion. The question and answer session was very nice. And really, I can tell you, this information, this fake information, you will see in the research also it involves. You will see there is a impact factor, journal impact factor. That is ISI, that is clarified analytic is maintaining. That is you will see there is a lot of fake journals. They are giving fake information of the impact factor. That all librarians should be very cautious, because they are the fake journals. There are a lot of fake journals. They don't have only e-journals. So they are writing their impact factor and so and so. This is the way that the library professional to convey their academic and research faculties, that what are the fake information not only spreads in social media, in the scientific community, in the research community also it prevails. That should be, librarians should be very cautious for that.
Yes, that's
And
definitely.
thank you everybody, and thank you Dr. Nihar, Dr. Ponda, Dr. Niranjan and Avinash, and everybody, all the executive members of Odisha Library Academy, and all the whole Odisha Library Academy live members who have coordinated the total last two pandemics we are just passing, and we are organizing. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And
Thank
one
you.
thing, those who will fill the feedback form, he will get the certificate, e-certificate.
Okay, feedback link will be hosted very soon. Will be shared.
Yeah. Okay, thank
Thank
you
you.
all. Jai Hind.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Jai.
Bye.
Jai.
Bye. Jai Hind.